Sportageous. Sport gets smarter.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Sportageous videocast, where we bring you insights into the sporting world, straight from the athletes, sports biz, sports professionals, and more. Our guest today is a paraclimber from the UK living with multiple sclerosis, meaning multiple scars, since 2009. Anita Aggarwal. Anita started climbing 13 years ago, but after a year of taking up the sport, she was diagnosed with MS, or multiple sclerosis, as I mentioned. Taking some time away from the sport and work, Anita began to paraclimb after mom's suggestion. And recently, Anita won her first ever competition, which led or resulted in her being asked to climb for her country. Anita, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here.
Thank you very much.
Let's get right into it, because of course this is such an interesting story, and I'm sure a lot of the people watching, listening, and myself personally as an amateur climber would really like to know and understand from you a little bit about your story. And first off, how did you get into the sport? And we're talking 2009. Climbing has blown up since then as a whole, if we look at it 13 years later today. How did you get into the sport in 2009? What got you to keep going? And just a little bit about your general story before, of course, we come to the paraclimbing side of things.
Okay. Originally, as you said, climbing was quite new. There was a church in my local town, and we just basically went to have a look at it and find out what it was. They only had ropes at the time, so we climbed on ropes. And the first time I went in there, I was hooked. I was like, I want to do this. I want to create a social environment and climb with my friends, and everybody seemed to like it. Mainly the reason was there were no rules. You could literally do what you want. You could climb with the same colors, or you could climb different colors. But there was, like with team sports, so you always have to sort of share and intermingle. But this is a team sport, but you climb separately. So originally it was just a new social climbing activity. Mm-hmm. So I did that for about a year, and then unfortunately I had an MS attack, and I was in hospital for 3 or 4 days. And when I came out, I wasn't actually able to walk. It was like having a stroke. Yeah. So I had like a new body, a new way of walking. Multiple sclerosis affects all of your senses, and I couldn't go back to work. I just didn't know what to do. So basically I went and had a go at climbing, and I realized I could hang on things, but what I couldn't do is I couldn't climb on a rope anymore. I physically couldn't do it. Yeah. So I tried this other kind of climbing that's called bouldering, which is like free climbing. And it's about 8 feet high and maybe only 10 to 15 handholds. So I tried that. And with MS, you get very fatigued very quickly. So I realized that I couldn't belay and climb anymore. And I couldn't be myself. I couldn't interact with people. So I started bouldering because I couldn't walk, but I could climb. And that's how I got into it.
Sure. And so you started bouldering, and previously you were lead climbing. Is that right?
No, not even lead climbing. It was like you said, it was very early on in climbing. So 2008 was when I had a go, and it was on ropes. So you literally, somebody tied me on and I just had a go. And then I learned belaying. Yeah. But after the attack, because I couldn't walk and I can't feel things down the left-hand side of my body. Yeah. So I had to learn how to teach my brain how to walk again, how to hold things. And being left-handed, I drop everything, so I had to learn to be right-handed.
Yeah.
But I wasn't able to go to work, so there was nobody to climb with. So I tried bouldering, and because MS limits how much you can do before you get tired, I thought, well, I need to try free climbing. I need to be able to hold my own body weight and trust my own limbs. And that's how I got into bouldering. So I changed in 2009. And then for some reason, I think, like any sort of new condition that you get, I had to go back to work. And it wasn't until 2016 that I really looked at climbing. I was able to live my life, but I wasn't able to live a valuable life and be able to enjoy what I was doing, because I was basically working for money and then doing nothing. So in 2016, I went back to try climbing again.
Yeah.
And I've sort of realized now, for the last 5 years, it's actually an activity that helps people with neurological conditions do a sport where you can be protected. And because there are no rules, I don't feel like I have to pick this color and I have to do it this way. Like other sports, there are rules that you have to follow. But climbing is what you make it. And that's why I continued to climb, because I realized for my mental health, for my depression, it was a way of teaching my body how to work again, how to hold things, how to stand on things. But even to this day, I probably couldn't walk more than half a mile before I collapsed. So it instead of being able to go forward in life, I'm going up. And that's what allows my body to continue working. So without climbing, my body could be worse, I think. So I use it as physio, balance training, and just like a way of maintaining my body. But it's something that now I'm addicted to, so I kept doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think that point that you raise, especially on, in its own way, the inclusivity of climbing as a sport. A lot of people talk about, the social side of things, how people can come together and support each other within climbing, and the communities are really, really special. I go to my local bouldering gym and people are always ready to help out, provide me with ideas, how to, how to finish a route, how to get to the top, that sort of thing. So what's that experience been like for you within bouldering and the sort of the gyms that you go to?
It's interesting, because the difficulty that I actually found when I became what I would call less able — I don't like being called disabled, I just think we're less able to do things — I started to see a big divide between those that could climb without physical barriers and those that couldn't. And being someone that, like you said, likes talking to people and likes interacting with people, I started to notice that there were barriers to being able to climb because I had multiple sclerosis. Now, it wasn't obvious in the sense that people knew I had a condition. Because it's an invisible condition, you still have to be aware that things could happen. And as climbing started to get more common, because it is now 10 years later, it's a lot more common, and a lot of people come along, I started to realize that people with physical impairments were struggling, like me, to climb a wall. And for some reason, I turned my job into coaching. So as a teacher anyway, as a computer teacher or a consultant, I realized that I had a go at climbing. I went there for physio, and I would climb in a way that was different to somebody else. So I use my elbows, I use my head, I use my knees because of my balance. But if you just look at a climbing wall and you climb it, if you're able-bodied like yourself, you can probably operate your limbs, whereas I can't. They kind of smash against the wall. So I decided that I wanted to get into the coaching side. So I started getting trained up into coaching and transferring my knowledge. But until I went to my first nationals, which was in 2016, that was the first time I'd ever seen any other paraclimbers. And a paraclimber doesn't mean a paraplegic. It's any disability that is, in my head, partially disabled or health related. So I didn't know that people with one leg climbed, or people with one arm, or even visually impaired and blind people. And I saw this at my first nationals. And I knew then when I went to that competition that I wanted to coach people with disabilities. And that's when I realized that actually going to a competition was really exciting for me. There was a challenge, there was an ultimate goal, and I was competing against people with similar conditions. I'm sure you know that if your local gym has a bouldering competition, it's categories age-based, so you just fit in a slot. So yeah, it was like going to the nationals, realizing I wanted to become a coach, and that's what I've done for the last 3 or 4 years.
I want to come to the coaching, Anita, but just before that, again, you raised a very interesting point where you talked about how MS is not a visible. It's not visible. So it's an invisible. So if someone, where as compared to someone who has a physical impairment, it's obviously very different in that perspective, from what I would understand, how someone, when you're outside, how someone would perceive it would be very different to someone who might have lost their leg or something of that sort. So has that ever made it any different in terms of when those social and community aspects of climbing? Was that something that perhaps stopped you from trying to go back into the sport, or what were your experiences like essentially in that regard, or was it never something that crossed your mind?
I think initially people who have a disability, whether it's a physical or a neurological, I am a new person. I am not the person I used to be. And people who get to know me today, like you're meeting me today, you know me as I am today. And therefore, when I was climbing, when I was looking at other people, you just look at them as climbers. That's what you do. Everybody's just a climber. But when somebody comes in and they're blind, all of a sudden, you don't realize that that person can climb as well as you, and they're blind, or a physical impairment like a loss of a limb or something like that. But neurologically, if I would see some children that were struggling, I would go, there's a cat coming. Sorry.
That's all right. Both of mine are walking around just down here, so they haven't jumped up yet.
Initially, from 2016, from 2008 to 2016, I realized that with a physical disability and enjoying climbing on a sociable level, I entered local competitions, just a bouldering competition. You climb so many climbs, whoever gets the most points wins. And I enjoyed it. But I didn't know there were any local regional competitions you could go to where it wasn't able-bodied. So if in a sport you have an event, in climbing, it's able-bodied. And if you want to compete, you have to go as able-bodied. And it wasn't, as I say, in 2016, that's when we realized that we have this community, but not a lot of people know about it. So when I moved over to people with other conditions, my ability to climb was measurable against other people with similar disabilities.
Yeah.
And it opened my eyes up to say, right, I want to educate people about this and make the community bigger. But normally and that would happen like once, I think, in 2016. I went to one event in the whole year, but there were loads of able-bodied events, and you try your best, but you have a barrier. It's like not having a handicap. But if I put a blindfold on you and then ask you to climb, you'd understand how much harder it is. Mm-hmm. So it was just about a way of finding out if there was a community there, and how, for me, socially, I'll climb with anybody, able-bodied or less abled. But my competitive side needs to be able to challenge myself to something, and that's where not everybody's a competition climber. Not everybody's I don't even think I'm that good. I just think being able to be in a community with other like-minded people who we don't have a problem talking about our disabilities, hidden or not. Yeah. But you do find that your able-bodied friends struggle to understand. Yeah. So therefore, if you want to measure up, like if I climb against you and it's the best person that wins, the difference is the skill. Mm-hmm. But I'm only 5'3", and sometimes you could just go into a general competition, but people who are a lot taller than me have an advantage. So something like that. How do you balance against height or weight? And in my case, it was processing. It's like thinking about the moves you're doing, not just doing them like able-bodied do. So.
Yeah, sure. And you've touched on it a little bit. I'd love to sort of have you break that down. You've been coaching for the past few years, and tell us a little bit about everyone who's watching and listening. Tell us a little bit about what coaching involves. So generally when we talk about coaching, coaches often say, "Oh, everybody is unique to themselves." You would be working with people who are, unique to themselves and also have different impairments which impact the way that, like, as you mentioned, the way that they climb. So run me through that coaching process a little bit to whatever extent you can.
Okay, so most of the people that I tend to take on as clients, I would normally do is one-to-one. Yeah. The clients that I tend to work with are those I seem to spot in climbing centres. So I will coach anybody, but I focus on people with hidden disabilities or not. So once I meet somebody, the first thing is their disability new? Is it something they've had all their life, or is it something that happened from an accident, say? Yeah. So the first thing I do is basically try and understand the person's disability. If we take, let's take an autistic person, someone who's got autism. They go into a climbing centre, they have to have a routine, they need to be able to do something repetitive and keep climbing. So if I work with somebody who's autistic, then I need to understand what they want to achieve, which could just be having a go at climbing. Yeah. Wanting to do an activity that they need to be skilled at first before they can try climbing without ropes, and be able to give them additional skills to help them achieve what they want to achieve on the wall. So I call it a bag of tricks. There are certain moves you can do in climbing that everybody can do. But sometimes that can't be done, because normally you climb on 3 points of contact, 2 hands and a foot. So if you look at somebody who's got one arm, they're now using their elbow.
Yeah.
What move can they do that allows them to use their elbow? The same with their leg. So I look at each person individually, and then I assess what needs to be learned, because there are only 5 handholds. There's only 5 ways you can hold a hold.
Yeah.
But each athlete I work with tends to have additional impairments. So if they're a visually impaired person, they need to learn how to go around the climbing centre. And that's not something a coach would normally do, but personally, the first thing I do with every visually impaired person is learn how to walk around the climbing centre with that person.
Yeah.
Learn how they communicate, like learning how to hold their elbow so you can guide them.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody comes in and they're very, very shy, the main thing I do is have fun with them and break down climbing in manageable chunks. And then I have a club where I invite these people to come together so they can start to build a social environment around their climbing, because these people can be very shy, depressed, and the club allows teamwork with the kids. And with adults, I see very similar things as well. You can teach some things separately. If somebody comes to me like you and says, okay, I want you to teach me how to climb this hard grade, then I can watch you climb and give you advice on how to improve. But if a person with an impairment comes in and you have a coach that doesn't understand there's a limb missing or there's a visual impairment, then you need to adjust the way you coach that person. So my club allows the kids to teach each other, which is really interesting to see able-bodied kids helping less abled kids. So I've got kids that have EDS, which is Ehlers-Danlos loss syndrome, which is hypermobility. I've got autistics. I've got a one-arm climber. I've got friends that are in wheelchairs. And simple things like going into a climbing wall and sitting on the floor to belay is unusual. You don't normally see it. Under coaching, you can actually adjust the way you coach. But some people who work in climbing centres tend to say, well, these are the rules you've got to follow, but we need to be able to adjust and have reasonable adjustment for people with disabilities. And that's the way I work, is I work on each individual. When they're confident enough and when they're relaxed with me, I will then bring them into the club, and then every kid's had the same interaction with me, and now they can work together. From there, going back to 2019, I was about 2 months away from taking this group, I call them the Inclusive Climbing Squad, to our nationals, because there's nowhere else they can go. They want to create an event, they want to have a go at climbing with other people, and we don't have nationals yet. We don't have regionals, local events. They don't exist because climbing's so new or less abled. But now we're in COVID, these kids will still get together with me and are growing and developing and having friends and climbing. But I know now that if we go to a national event, which would be their first ever event, they've got friends. They can walk in. They can look at the surroundings. People who have got autism and Asperger's, people who are dyspraxic, people who are so shy because they are already isolated at school, have a community that looks after them. So once I have learned how this particular person climbs, I then try it myself. So I've tried blind climbing, which is brilliant. It teaches you to rely on your footwork. I've played games with one arm or one leg, so you can only hold on with one hand. And that's how we work in the club. Everybody learns everybody else's skills. So we're starting to draw on different movements from different sides of climbing. So we've still got rope climbing, we've got sport climbing, which is clipping and then putting the rope in. We've got traditional climbing, which is putting the nut in, then the quick draw, then the rope.
Yeah.
Then we've got bouldering, and they're different moves entirely. We've got deep water soloing, which is another way of climbing. We've got ice climbing with axes.
Yeah.
So we've got the Fig 4 and the Fig 9 move. But I use those in my climbing. It doesn't matter that it's an ice climbing move, but we're slowly drawing these abilities in because these kids need a different way of hanging.
Yeah.
And that's how I kind of work with my kids, is we all share each other's disabilities and skills. So that's sort of where the club started and where the coaching came from, because when I went to the nationals, he's come back. When I went to the nationals, I realized that people wanted to climb and their parents didn't understand how to get a kid into a competition that nobody knew about. It's not very well advertised. And that's where I come in. That's where I try and promote it in UK. So I have found athletes of other nationalities. I mentioned to you before, I have a New Zealand, an Australian climber. He was born with 2 club feet.
Mm-hmm.
So both his feet were facing inwards. And I spotted him just by walking into the gym. And this is just me. I just went, "What's wrong? You don't seem to be climbing properly." And he went, "I've got club feet," which actually made him a disabled climber. And he didn't even know paraclimbing existed.
Yeah.
And at the moment, I think there's only 3 competition climbers in Australia.
Mm-hmm.
So I want, how do we educate people to say this sport is here, but it's so new that nobody knows about it? How do you get into it? And talking to you is trying to raise that awareness of how we can all climb together and build this community. It's like the very, very start of disabled climbing, but we don't have regionals. We only have nationals. And then these people are picked to join the country's international team, like the Great Britain team.
Mm-hmm.
And then they go to the international events, and they've never been there before. And they don't.
Yeah.
Their parents are sending these kids off, having never been there. Or so the youngest age is 16 to go to an international event.
Yeah.
And in able-bodied climbing, there's age-based. As simple as that. Juniors and seniors, male and female.
Yeah.
But one of the things I wanted to explain is paraclimbing for me is for anybody who may have a condition or obtain an impairment in future. So we get older and we hurt ourselves.
Yeah.
But there's no age in paraclimbing. There isn't an age. I'm 48 and one of my teammates is 25 and we're in the same category. It's male and female with disability, legless, armless, visually impaired or neurological. It doesn't matter how old you are.
Yeah.
So we still have athletes at international level that are 50 and over. But I've only been competing 3 years. So it's like saying you have an accident in climbing and you become a paraclimber for your country, but there's no career path to get there. There's no education to get there. You don't know where to start. You don't know where to go. And it's so new that, like we know, climbing has gone into the Olympics, and I'm sure we'll come on to that. But how do you build a new sport when nobody knows about it? Nobody knows how to coach them. Nobody knows they exist. But I can go in a climbing centre and go, it does exist. I've been to it. Shall we climb together? And I'll help you get to the nationals, and then progress and progress. So
that's absolutely fascinating, and just very, very unique in that, obviously, you touched on the Olympics, climbing at the Olympics. And I guess that brings me, or gets me thinking as to how does climbing being at the Olympics impact the growth of paraclimbing and potentially the Paralympics? Obviously, though, if you're talking about the lack of regional infrastructure, the lack of opportunities at that very basic level, you've got to get that foundation sorted first, from what I understand, before you can even talk about something like that. Like, I know that here in Australia, even with able-bodied climbers, most of them do not get any sort of funding. They may get a scholarship here or there. It's not like it is in Europe, maybe, in the UK and France, where people are able to make a living out of it. I think most of the Australian climbers have to do a side job or something of that sort. So coming back to, I guess, sort of tying that in, how does this impact paraclimbing? And in your opinion, maybe, I'm going too far ahead, but what needs to be done at that base level to reach that stage? Because, of course, there are lots of benefits in being, in the Paralympics. As we're seeing with climbing now, there's growth, awareness, opportunities. So that's what it will result in as well. But what needs to be done from your perspective on that front?
I think with climbing going into the Olympics, it's going to make it more visible, which is one of the good things. A lot of the climbing community was 50-50. They didn't know whether it should be an Olympic sport. It wasn't something anybody would ever think about, because the sport hasn't actually been going that long. But what has already happened is, because climbing is in Tokyo Olympics, it's actually triggered, depending on whether the sport stays in, Paralympians for climbing is already in discussion at international level, at country level. It's already in discussion. The federations still have us involved. So it's kind of working backwards. The top level is the International Federation of Sports Climbing, and we compete at that level. Nationally, we have lots of athletes who have to pay for themselves. They get little or no funding. They have to have a job, and they have to know a national exists. And then when you get below 16, which is the area I'm focusing on for now, the kids that are under 16 have no experience. But with the announcement that we're having climbing in Tokyo, that can trigger an application for climbing in the Paralympics, as long as there's the right number of entrants country-wise. So it's like any new sport. You can't get any regionals unless you have people that will create regionals, which is something that it might take quite a few years to get regionals. We have clubs in the UK. We have varying paraclimbing clubs, and most of them have been created or are run by athletes who have been to the nationals and realised we need a local club. So UK is made up of England, Ireland, Scotland and Wales, and in Scotland they've created a paraclimbing club where you can bring everybody together.
Yeah.
But it is going to take time because I believe we need 32 countries to make it a Olympian sport. And we have about 22 countries at the moment around the world that compete. But as Australia is an example, how do the federation get involved? How do we promote this? It will take time. We have clubs in the gyms, but they're normally junior clubs or kids clubs, or over here we have something called NICAS, which is a certification. And climbing has gone into our educational system. GCSE sports or PE includes climbing. But at the moment, it's too new to say. I think we need quite a few years to build it. And this is hopefully one of those things where people can contact me, or I can try and sort of give people advice on what I've done and how I've noticed. Because at every level, I'd say most of the kids that I work with just want to climb for fun.
Yeah.
But those that have routines want to challenge themselves and they want to compete. The difficulty I find is they can climb in their local climbing centre, but they can't even go to the next city and climb in that gym because they've never left the gym they're in. So I even have clients that are 2-3 years working with, and I still haven't gotten to another climbing centre yet. So it's going to take time. Unfortunately, with COVID, I think it's set us back. And it's set us back for quite a few years because we're isolated, we're vulnerable, we can't exercise like everybody else does. Even my ability to climb in has dropped. I can't just get back onto the wall when we come out of COVID. So maybe these regionals will come along because more and more people will realise that climbing is literally like climbing a set of stairs, but a social way of doing it. But we need to have more coaches that understand, like crossing barriers. Like if you're a physical therapist or a physio or another, let's say, Special Olympics coach, we need to draw from them on their skills and how they work with their clients, and then hopefully build climbing. But it's going to take time. It's going to take quite a while, I think. We have, I think it's 160 international athletes. So we have a lot of athletes.
Yeah.
But a lot of them are from a big country. So the USA's team's about 30, which is a lot of paraclimbers.
Yeah.
It'd be nice to get disabled climbing events as a local event. I just think it needs a little bit more understanding of the safety involved. So most of our events, if anybody knows climbing, able-bodied climbing is lead climbing, where you have to free climb and clip the rope. In paraclimbing, we're on top rope. We're not allowed to lead climb. So safety-wise, it's really safe. From the bottom to the top, it's just a top rope. But we don't have bouldering in our competitions because I just don't think people understand that we can do it. So we're kind of tarred with the same brush. So if someone in my category is in a wheelchair and can only campus, which means only use their arms, then they can hurt themselves if they fall on a boulder. But it shouldn't stop the other categories from competing. Like, how did other sports evolve? How did other para sides evolve? We have the Special Olympics, and we have other sports like tennis. So we have them in the Olympics, but I think we need to refer to those coaches of other sports and understand, exactly how long it's going to take. And I think it'll take a good 5 to 10 years before we're at that level where most continents have climbers in with disabilities. Because we need to find another 10 countries. So does Australia have a paraclimbing coach, or does it have a normal coach? And how do they introduce it? How do you get involved? I think it's just communication.
Yeah, definitely. And just for everyone watching or listening, be sure to check out Anita's socials so you can get in touch if you have any ideas or anything that you want to perhaps chat to her about. It'll be in the description, caption, whatever it is below, wherever you're watching or listening. Anita, just before we wrap things up, I feel like this conversation can just go on because I have a lot of questions that I will take you up on at some point, but we've got to fit it into the video cast. You've sort of elaborated on it, but what are you working towards, focusing on for the future? How can people who might have some ideas to assist or support play their part on this front? And you've already talked about the next steps of paraclimbing and what needs to be done, but what's going on? What's on your horizon specifically?
Okay, so hopefully if we're allowed to travel at some point in the future, I'd like to try and get back to another international event. That's my personal objective, to get back into fitness and go internationally for competition. But from a giving back point of view, what I want to do is give back my skill to the community and hand off the knowledge that I've learned to other coaches and try and build it that way, and then build up a community of people that work on this side. So I have quite a few contacts at the moment now where we can sort of see the barriers and how we need to actually educate people and grow. But ultimately, I want to help find as many paraclimbers as possible and grow the sport as quick as possible, and then try and get it into the Special Olympics. So we have Paralympians, which are more visually impaired, physically impaired, and neurologically impaired. But under the Special Olympics, we still have short-statured, Down syndromes, autistics, physical or mental disabilities. And over here, I've started to identify the process that we're going to have to go through. But ultimately, it's how can I give back in the community and help raise awareness for people who can come and try this sport. And as you said, it's just, in my world, it's an adult's playground, and the kids come into our world. It's like our playground because we can climb in it. Where do we ever get another sport where it's our playground and kids have to come and climb with us? And we can climb the same thing.
Yeah.
And try and...
I love that description, by the way.
Well, it is because we climb in it. So we are the climbers, but we can't go on a climbing frame in a park because we're an adult. But I just love it as a community and just try and grow the sport, and maybe come back once a year with an update and try and see where we're going, where Australia's going to go, where's New Zealand going to go. We're isolated. And in order for paraclimbing to become an Olympic event, we have to hold international events in your home country. So how does Australia get international events for paraclimbers?
Sure.
When there's only three I know live in Australia and one lives here. I only know of 4 athletes at the moment. How do we build the sport? There's only one Indian paraclimber. There's only one Hungarian paraclimber.
Yeah.
That Indian paraclimber is male, and he's just opened up his first Bangalore bouldering centre. Looks like you wouldn't believe it, but man, he's built a bouldering wall in Bangalore, and it's amazing. Wow. So it's the first big, or South Africa, I've even seen that they have no lead walls, they have no bouldering walls, they have no speed walls, and they competed for a place in Tokyo Olympics, and they don't even have a community yet. So it's just raising awareness, like lots of other topics we could talk about, like BLM, diversity, but just trying and empowering people and say, come on, let's have a go, let's build a community, let's build regionals. And there's no age, so you can. I even see people on a Thursday who come as regular retired people that come along that have been trad climbers from the 70s and the 80s, and they can still boulder. Yeah. And they're doing it at 70, 80 years old.
That's amazing.
It's amazing. There are so many people who are of retirement age that can still climb as good as they could when they were younger. And it's just a great place to come and have a go.
Absolutely. Well, look, everyone, like I just said earlier, if you're watching, listening, be sure to follow Anita on her socials, check out, the work that she's doing, the journey itself. Anita, it's been such a pleasure having you on the show, and I hope that, we can do a bit from our end and raise a bit of that awareness that you talked about through our own platform. It's really, really been great talking to you, and I feel like I could just keep asking you tons and tons of questions, but we'll leave it at that for today, Anita. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.